Okay, this is a first installment of Grandpa Joe videos after the initial introduction, and I want to start by telling y'all a little bit about myself. Okay, so I was born in a town called Kokomo, Indiana, which is basically like a manufacturing town. So there's a couple car manufacturing facilities there that my parents worked at. My dad worked for a company called Chrysler, and my mom worked for a company called Delco, which was a subsidiary of the of GMC. And basically, she made radio components. So any electronic parts or anything like that that go into the Chevrolet or GMC cars, my mom helped make those. And my dad worked at Chrysler. I'm not exactly sure where because he didn't stay there very long. I didn't have a very pleasant childhood. My dad was probably one of the worst people that have ever lived on this planet, and that includes Hitler. Hitler did a lot of terrible things, but most of it he didn't do personally. He had other people do it for him. My dad did a lot of horrible things himself. And one of those things was that he was very, very abusive. He would beat me constantly. There wasn't very few days that went by that I wasn't hit in some way, either slapped or kicked or brutally beaten. In most cases for doing nothing at all. He was, just liked causing people pain. He enjoyed it. He was a real sadist. And for example, the way he played with us was to hit us, right? So back then we had these, probably still around, Mattel Hot Wheels, right? And they had these race tracks that were basically these long strips of plastic, and they were, relatively thin and very flexible. And he'd take 2 or 3 of those and he'd stack them together, and he would hit us with them for fun, And we would run away from him, and he would chase after us and hit us with these things, and that we would, fight back, grab whatever we could, and hit him back, and that's how he had fun with us. He would rough us up, grab hold of us and, pound on our heads or whatever else he felt like, doing to hurt us. He would just punch us. This is a grown man. When I was a little bitty kid, 2 or 3 years old, he would punch us and knock us back on the floor. He broke my rib. I don't know when, but it was when I was very young, and it never healed back properly because we didn't go to the doctor, right? I'm sure they didn't know that it was broken, but they should have been able to tell. My mom and dad should be able to tell that it was sore. I'm not blaming my mom. My mom was just as much a victim as us kids were, and things were a lot different back in the 60s when I was a small child, and women didn't really have any recourse, any place to go to get away from an abusive husband. And families would, you know, tell their children to stay together, right, to stick it out. Well, I don't think that my mom's parents understood the severity to which that her and us kids were being abused, because my dad was a very convincing liar, and he would just tell them that, oh, they're making that up, I never hurt her that bad, she just, didn't like to do what I asked her to do, and so she got all upset, and she's just jealous or whatever, and was very successful. And another thing that contributed to that was my dad pretended to be a very religious person. He said that he was called to preach, and the church we went to was a really good church, but he convinced those people that he was a man of God, and that he was going to start a ministry and preach. Well, that was all true, but his reasons for doing what he did weren't, for good. They were personal. He wanted to be a famous TV preacher. That was his goal. There was another man who was a preacher, a charlatan, and he modeled his life after this other man. So this other man, like I said, was a famous TV preacher locally anyway, but he would go around, he's a married man, but he would go around with this young 16-year-old girl that was his mistress, and he was just very nonchalant about it. He would bring this girl with him when he would go around on the road to different venues to preach, and like it was no big deal. So he was an adulterer, but he was very charismatic, and so people accepted and believed what he said, that, oh, this girl is just, a friend of his or whatever, he's a good man, he wouldn't do anything wrong. I mean, this is just some girl that is a friend of their family or whatever. And that's who my dad fashioned his life after. That's who he wanted to emulate. And so, he was an adulterer. He cheated on my mom constantly. I actually have twin sisters that he bore with one of the women at that church we went to. And she, turns out, was just like him. She was a very abusive, disgusting kind of a person that actually, pretty much killed her own son. She, threw him down a flight of stairs, and he had severe head injury as a result of it that left him mentally deficient. And then over a period of years of, I'm sure, a lot amount of abuse, he ended up dying. So she basically killed her own son, and her daughters, they saw this and they knew who she was, and I talked with them briefly, and they told me that she was a very abusive person, and especially to their brother. So that's who he wanted to fashion his life after. And so as a young child, we dealt with that constantly. So to everyone else, my dad was this wonderful man of God who was very religious, and kept his family, in line, and really made sure that his kids grew up to be good Christian children, and he was a loving husband and really cared for his wife and all this sort of thing. But nothing could be further than the truth. In reality, we were basically prisoners and slaves to heed to his every whim. He would snap his fingers like that and give a command, and expect us to follow that immediately, and if we didn't, then we were beaten. And he would show that off in front of other people. So when we would go to other people's homes, or they would come and visit us, he would demonstrate, his great power he had over his family. And on more than one occasion, even when I was older, like 12, 13 years old, one of the things he liked to do to show his dominance of his family is that we'd have people there invited over, so like another family or two families or three families, whatever, there in our home, and he would start talking about how that he's the head of the house and that everyone in his family is subject to him, and he would say, no, to watch this, and he would snap his fingers and he would call me and my sister over, and he would tell us to get down on the floor and grunt like pigs. So we would get down on the floor and oink like pigs and root around on the carpet while he laughed. And these other people would look in amazement and try to rationalize it in their own minds. Is this a stunt that the kids are a part of? Or why is he doing this? Kind of a thing. Very confused looks on their face as we were humiliated in front of them. And no one ever did anything about it. No one ever said anything about it. They just, kind of laugh it off. Well, I guess it's the way it is here. Yeah, Mike, you really are in control of your kids. That's good on you, I guess. But even around other people, he couldn't control his urge to show, how much control he had over us. So, growing up, we had no ability to do anything. Like, it was pretty commonplace for young children to go spend the night over at a friend, right? A sleepover. I never had a sleepover. Not once in my life until I was 16, and I'll get to that in a second. Not even family. So my grandparents on my mom's side lived in Tampa, Florida, and we lived, of course, in Indiana. So we didn't get to see them very often. Just Christmas time and maybe Thanksgiving. So not even every year. So, and my aunt, my mom's sister, lived just this next street over. So literally maybe 200 feet from where my grandparents lived is where my aunt lived. And she had two children, a son and a daughter. And I wasn't allowed to go spend the night with my cousins 200 feet away. I'm talking about not as a child. I'm talking about as like 10, 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid. I wasn't allowed to go and stay at my aunt's house, just, a few hundred feet away. And we weren't allowed to socialize with other children, so we didn't have friends. We couldn't do anything with them, so you go with your friends and go do things, and we weren't allowed to do that. We were controlled, had to be at our home, within eyesight, pretty much, all the time. And when I was older, I would take my bike and go ride it around, but I wasn't allowed to go to anyone's home. If my dad ever found out that I had been at someone else's home, then I would get beat. And when I say beat, I mean he would either, and this was all the way up till I was late teens. I'd have to go into the room, pull my pants all the way down and my underwear, so I was there naked. He would then take his belt and hit me however much he wanted to, sometimes 20 times, sometimes 30, sometimes 40, or just when he got tired. And he would leave me, in many cases, bleeding. And sometimes he would use a switch, a stick, and beat me with that. Same thing for my sister, so she wasn't left out. And this was commonplace. So we did exactly what he said because we knew that we would be severely punished. So didn't have any socialization, didn't have any girlfriends. I never had a girlfriend. I've kissed only one girl. I kissed one girl on the neck when I was probably 13 years old. Got the courage to do that, but that was it. And we weren't allowed to have boyfriends or girlfriends, right? So that wasn't allowed. So it was very frustrating, and no socialization led to a lot of problems further down the line. So a lot of abuse growing up, and there wasn't anybody to help us. Nobody believed my mother when she would, she went to the pastor and told him that, that Mike was being cruel to her, and he didn't believe her. My father was so convincing that he didn't believe her, and it wasn't until later that he found out what a horrible person he is, and told my mom, "You should have left him a long time ago." And my mom said, "I was trying to. You said not to." And he's like, I didn't have any idea." And she's like, "Yeah, I tried to tell you." So, horrible person. So I grew up abused severely. If it wasn't for my mom, I don't think we would have made it. She tried to leave several times, but when she would try to leave, he would threaten to kill us. And we all believed him that he would kill us all, and then kill himself. I don't believe so much in the kill himself, but he would definitely kill us. He was that kind of evil. And I know this is not something that for young kids to see, so you're not going to see these videos until you're in your late teens. It was horrific. And so it made me a very hurt and distant kind of a person. Because, like I said, I didn't really have any friends, didn't have any real socialization, didn't know how to interact with people. And because of that, I made a lot of mistakes in my life that led to problems for my children, for which I'm sorry for. I wish things could have been different. And it's not to say that I don't think that children should be spanked or, get their butts slapped a few times. There's nothing wrong with that when they do something wrong, but this was just for fun. He would beat us because he wanted to, not because we did anything wrong. To give the worst example, when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, it had to be when I was 6 or 7 years old because we were still living in Indiana, and we left Indiana when I was, still 7 years old. So, and it was a while before we left when this happened. We had an next door neighbor who had a garage behind our house, and one of the windows was broken in his garage. And so my dad called us outside and asked me and my sister which one of us had broken this window. Now, neither one of us did, and we believe it was the kid. There's a small boy that was visiting our neighbor, for a couple days, and we think it was either that kid or it was my dad accidentally, because he liked powerful, sports car type, vehicles with real powerful Indian engines, and so he would peel out, and we lived on the driveways up there, all of them were gravel, so he maybe spun up some gravel and broke the window himself. But regardless, he was blaming us and wanted us to tell him which one of us had done it, and neither one of us did, and we told him that. And he's like, I know that one of you did this, and if you don't tell me who did it, I'm going to beat you both. And we knew that he wasn't kidding, that he was going to beat us both. So knowing that, I thought very quickly and came up with a plan to try to get at least my sister from getting a beating. So I told him, I said, if I tell you who did it, do you promise you won't whip them? And I made it seem as if I was about to tell on my sister. Right? So I made him believe that I was going to tell on my sister, but that I didn't want her to get a whipping. Right? So he said, yes, if you tell me who did it, I promise I won't give him a whipping. And so I said, I did it. So now my sister's completely off the hook, and he just promised that if I told him who did it, that he wouldn't whip him. So I was elated. I was so thrilled. We had avoided getting beat. Right? I was really happy. Until later that evening, when he called me into his bedroom, and he asked me, well, how many rocks did you throw in that window? And I said, one, because I've already lied and said I did it. So I said one, and he's like, well, there was more than one rock that was thrown into that window, so you're lying to me, so I'm going to beat you for lying. And so he beat me, but it wasn't real severe. I was bruised up pretty bad, but I wasn't bleeding. So I thought, okay, well, he had his fun. He got to beat me, so, that's that. And then shortly thereafter, like the next week, we took this little mini vacation to this fishing place, right? So there's some big lake that we went to, and they had some little apartments to rent to stay there, so you can, fish for a couple, 2 or 3 days, right? So we were staying in this little place, and there was a sandbox outside, and me and my sister were playing in the sandbox when my mother came out and told me that Dad wanted me to come inside. So I go inside, and he's laying there in the bed, and he asks, well, how many rocks did you throw into that window again? And so I knew I was in trouble, because I knew that it didn't matter what I said, that I was going to get beat. Because I knew that he knew that he was just making these numbers up. I knew that. Even that small, I was smart enough to figure that out. This was just another reason to beat me. So I said 2, like that. 2. I just gave him a number because I knew I was going to get beat. And he goes, well, there was more than 2 here. Yeah, of course there was. And he's like, you just can't stop lying, can you? So I'm going to teach you a lesson, young man, that you're never going to forget. And he was right. So he told my mom, I want you to go out and cut a branch off that sticker bush out there. Okay? So there was a bush outside that had some thorns on it. And so my mom, crying, and she was begging him the entire time, please, Mike, don't do this. Don't do this, Mike. Please don't do this. Please, Mike, don't do this. And she, his standard answer says, you either go out there and bring in that switch, or I'm going to beat him, I'm going to beat Michelle, and I'm going to beat you. I'm going to beat all of you unless you go do what I tell you to do. And he wasn't kidding. So she reluctantly went out and cut this branch, and I'm standing beside her, sobbing, begging, please, don't do this, don't do this. And she's sobbing and crying and cutting this branch off. And she luckily cut all the thorns off of it, but still there's bumps, right, where these thorns were. It's a very rough stick. And so she brought it in there, and he tells her, now you beat him with it. And she's begging, and he's telling her, nope, you're gonna beat him. And so she gave me like 10 smacks with this switch. And I'm, naked, right? And then he takes it from her, and he beat me until the stick just fell apart. Just splinters everywhere. And that was a pretty severe beating. Lots of blood streaming, just streams of blood. I was several deep cuts on my rear end and on my back and on my legs. And it took a long time to heal, but he was right. I definitely remembered not to lie. And so from then on, I tried to make sure I didn't tell any more lies, even if it was to save my own hide. But that's the kind of abuse that I suffered as a child, and because of that, it left me a very hardened kind of person. So for the first 25 years of my life, I was a very distant person. I didn't really talk to people that much. I kept to myself. I didn't really socialize with people. And I was deeply, deeply angry and bitter and hardened. I had no emotions. That was another thing about the beatings, is that I wasn't allowed to cry. So if I made any sound at all, he would beat me more. And he would tell me, you stop crying or I'm going to beat you until you stop. So that beating that he gave me, I never made a sound. And beatings after that, same thing. He beat me, and I wouldn't make a sound. And by the time I was 10 years old, I wouldn't even shed a tear. So, and I'd lost all feeling, emotion of any kind. I had no sympathy for others. I had no empathy. I was just kind of dead inside. So that led to a lot of problems later on. It took me a long, long time to get over it. And as you're going to see in these videos, Papa cries a lot now. Thankfully, I guess. Sometimes too much. But that gives you a good idea of what my younger days were like. And hopefully explains some of these things I'm going to say later on. That's all for now. I think that's enough.